On the morning of Monday, November 9th, 2020, 12 jurors walked back into the Snohomish County Courthouse in Everett, Washington, to finish deciding a murder case that had waited 48 years for an answer. 7 women, 5 men. They had deliberated through Friday afternoon, gone home for the weekend, and returned to close the oldest case any of them would ever touch. It was, the Everett Herald reported, the longest a family had ever waited for justice in Snohomish County, and lived to see it in court. What those 12 people did not know was that the case had already changed. Just before 10, in a house off 52nd Place West, near Edmonds, a woman picked up the phone and dialed 911. She was calling about her husband. His name was Terrence Miller. He was 78 years old, a retired heavy equipment operator who ran a small ceramics shop out of his garage with his wife. And he was the defendant. He was supposed to be waiting, like everyone else, for the verdict. He had been free on a $1 million bond, confined to his home, monitored electronically, ordered by the court to surrender every firearm he owned. He had never missed a court date, not once, until now. Because that morning, while 12 strangers weighed his fate a county away, Terrence Miller took his own life inside that house. Inside the courtroom, the machinery of justice kept moving. Word of the death reached the attorneys. His defense team moved immediately to dismiss the case. The defendant was gone, they argued, and a verdict against a man who cannot be sentenced serves no one. The prosecutor, Craig Matheson, could not have disagreed more. A family had waited 48 years, he said. They deserved to hear the answer out loud, in open court, on the record. Judge David Kurtz listened to both sides. Then he made a decision that would be debated far beyond Everett. The verdict would be taken. Hi viewers, before you hear what that jury decided, answer this honestly in the comments. If you had waited 48 years for justice, would you still want to hear the verdict read out loud, knowing the man it named would never spend a single day in prison? Yes or no? Because that is the question sitting at the center of everything you are about to hear. In the gallery sat the family of Jody Loomis. She was 20 years old in the summer of 1972, an artist who painted running horses across her bedroom walls, a young woman who set out one August afternoon to visit the horse she loved and never came home. Her parents died without ever knowing who took her from them. Her sister spent nearly 5 decades waiting for a name. Now the name had a face at last, and the face belonged to a man who would never stand for sentencing. The jurors filed back in, unaware that the man they had judged was dead. The foreman handed over the verdict. The room went still, and to understand what that piece of paper truly meant, what it cost, and what it could never deliver, you have to leave this courtroom and go back to a dirt road in the woods on a warm August afternoon in 1972. The woods along Penny Creek Road were quiet on the afternoon of August 23, 1972. That summer, Jody Loomis was 20 years old. She lived in a single-story house off Winesap Road near Bothell, Washington, with her parents, her fiancé, and her 12-year-old sister. She had celebrated her birthday in June. She was an artist, and the proof was on her bedroom walls, where she had painted a mural of running horses. Horses were not decoration to her. They were the center of her life. Her own horse, Saudi, was stabled about 6 miles from the house, and there are photographs from that year of Jody standing beside him, young and smiling, with no idea how few days she had left. On that Wednesday afternoon, she set out to see him. Normally, someone in the family drove her. Not this time. Prosecutors would later tell a jury it was the first time she had ever ridden a bicycle to the stable alone. She climbed onto her 10-speed and pedaled away from Winesap Road into a part of southern Snohomish County that was far more rural then than it is now, a landscape of dirt roads and second-growth timber in what is today the city of Mill Creek. 6 miles, that was the whole trip. She never finished it. That evening, on a dirt track off Penny Creek Road, 2 passers-by came upon a young woman on the ground. She was partly unclothed, and she was gravely hurt. They did not wait for anyone. They lifted her into their vehicle and drove for help as fast as the roads would allow. It was not enough. Jody Loomis died at the hospital. The medical evidence told investigators what had happened in those woods. She had been sexually assaulted, and she had been shot once, above the right ear, with a .22 caliber weapon. Investigators would later conclude the person who did it had stood behind her. She stood under 5 feet tall. Detectives interviewed witnesses. They collected evidence from the scene and from her clothing. They chased the case the way police in 1972 could chase a case, with shoe leather and interviews and files that grew thicker by the month, and they found nothing that pointed to a viable suspect. Jody and the person who killed her, investigators would eventually determine, had never met before that day. There was no relationship to trace, no motive to follow, no name. The case went cold, and it stayed cold, through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s. Her parents grew old waiting. Both of them died without ever learning who took their daughter. But the answer had been in the evidence room the entire time, because of one small detail from that August afternoon. The boots Jody wore on her last ride did not belong to her. She had borrowed them from her little sister, 12 years old that summer. And on one of those borrowed boots, the man who killed her left something behind, a stain so small that the county coroner's office missed it, sheriff's detectives missed it, the FBI missed it. For 36 years, nobody saw it at all. It took until January 2008 for anyone to look closely enough. That year, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office cold case team pulled the Loomis file back off the shelf. The case was one of those featured on a deck of cold case playing cards the Sheriff's Office created in 2008, a public plea for anyone who remembered anything. Detectives sent the physical evidence, held since 1972, to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for DNA testing. And a state crime lab technician found what 3 agencies had overlooked for 3.5 decades. A tiny stain of semen on the boot Jody had borrowed from her sister. Think about what that stain represented. In 1972, DNA identification did not exist. Nobody knew that a mark too small to notice would one day be able to speak. The killer could not have known it either. He had left behind the one thing that time could not erase. But finding the evidence and finding the man were 2 different problems. The lab developed a genetic profile from the stain. It was somewhat degraded after so many years, but it was usable, and it was uploaded to CODIS, the national DNA database that holds profiles of convicted offenders. Detectives waited for the hit. It never came. Whoever left that stain had never been swabbed into the system. Detectives used the profile to rule out old suspects, one by one, and every comparison came back the same. Not him, not him, not him. The DNA could eliminate the innocent, but it could not name the guilty. For 10 more years, the profile sat there, an answer with no question it could attach to. There is something else about those years that matters, and the defense would later make sure a jury heard it. When this case finally reached a courtroom, Miller's attorneys argued that critical evidence had been lost or destroyed, that items were unaccounted for over roughly 3 decades, and that the boot itself had been contaminated during testing. His public defender, Laura Martin, insisted the DNA analysis was botched and that the stain on the outside of a boot could not tell the whole story. Hold on to that argument. It becomes the entire battlefield later. Then came 2018, and everything changed at once. That spring, police in California announced they had identified the suspected Golden State Killer using a technique almost nobody had heard of: forensic genetic genealogy. Instead of searching criminal databases, investigators uploaded crime scene DNA to public ancestry sites, the same places where ordinary people search for lost cousins, and worked backward through family trees toward a single name. Snohomish County moved fast. The private lab, Parabon Nanolabs, extracted a new profile from the boot evidence, one built for genealogy databases. The file went up on GEDmatch, a public site. Relatives surfaced. Distant matches, scattered branches, the raw material of a family tree. An Oregon forensic genealogist named Deb Stone took those branches and started building. On August 14, 2018, she reached the trunk. The DNA on Jody's boot, she concluded, belonged to a son of one specific couple from Edmonds, Washington. That couple had 6 sons, 6 brothers, 1 family, 1 answer hiding among them. 2 of the 6 were already dead by the time detectives began looking at the family. That left 4 living brothers, 4 men who had grown up in Edmonds, any one of whom might be the source of the DNA on a murdered woman's boot. But when detectives ran the 4 names, one of them stood out immediately: Terrence Miller. According to charging papers, he had been accused of sex offenses at least 5 times over the decades. In 1968, in 1978, twice in 1990, and once in 1999, the Everett Herald reported how those cases ended. 1 conviction for lewd conduct, 1 deferred prosecution, 2 that brought no charges, 1 declined because the statute of limitations had likely run out. In 1968, 4 years before Jody died, he had been cited after exposing himself to a 17-year-old girl walking down a street in Mountlake Terrace. She got his license plate. In 1972, Miller was living just blocks off 164th Street Southwest, about 5 miles from the woods along Penny Creek. He was around 30 years old. He worked as a heavy equipment operator, a union man who ran machines all over western Washington. He was a lifelong resident of the county, and in all the years since, he had never left it. He was 76 now, retired, running a small ceramics business called Miller's Cove, out of his garage with his 4th wife. Detectives did not knock on his door. They watched him. On August 29, 2018, undercover officers followed Miller to the Tulalip Resort Casino. They watched him drink a cup of coffee. They watched him toss the cup into a garbage can. And the moment he walked away, they retrieved it. On September 6, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab delivered the result. The DNA on the coffee cup matched the DNA on Jody Loomis's boot. After 46 years, they had him. And still, they did not arrest him. They kept watching, building the case, tracking his movements for months. That November, 2 undercover detectives went further. They visited Miller's Cove itself, posing as customers. His wife invited them into the garage, and there, on a table, they saw something that stopped them: a newspaper. A single edition of the Daily Herald, nearly 7 months old. The front page story was about an arrest in a local cold case, a double murder involving a sexual assault and gunshot wounds, cracked by a brand new technique called genealogy. The same county, the same detective's office, the same science that was, at that very moment, closing around the man who had saved that paper. A prosecutor later wrote in the probable cause affidavit that the newspaper seemed, at best, an odd coincidence, and that a fair inference was that Miller was tracking the techniques police were using to solve cold cases. He was watching them. He just did not know they were already inside his garage. On April 10, 2019, detectives ended the wait and arrested Terrence Miller at his home on a charge of first-degree murder. 5 days later, he appeared by video monitor in Snohomish County Superior Court and pleaded not guilty. Then came the argument that, in hindsight, reads like a warning nobody could act on: bail. Miller's side wanted it within reach. Deputy Prosecutor Craig Matheson fought to keep it at $1 million, and his reasoning was blunt. If convicted, a man of Miller's age was effectively facing a life sentence. That gave him a powerful incentive to run. And Matheson raised a second possibility, on the record, in open court. He was concerned that outside the jail walls, Miller might harm himself. "We want our day in court," the prosecutor said. Jody's sister, Jana, stood before the judge too. Since that day in 1972, she said, the accused had celebrated birthdays and holidays, had married, had raised children. He had lived his life. Her sister had been given no life to live. Miller posted the $1 million bond. A bail company told a Seattle television station he had put up $100,000 in cash, money he would never get back. He went home to Edmonds under strict conditions. Electronic home monitoring, run by a private company, and a direct court order to surrender every weapon and firearm in his home. He never missed a court date. Through delays, through a pandemic that pushed the trial back, he showed up, an old man in a courtroom, answering for a summer afternoon from another century. The trial finally opened in November 2020 and ran 2 weeks. Prosecutors Craig Matheson and Bob Langben built everything around one immovable fact: Miller's DNA on the boot of a 20-year-old stranger, a girl he had never dated and never known, on the day she was attacked and killed. There was no innocent road that led there. Laura Martin answered with the evidence chain: decades of storage, items lost, alleged contamination, including by an analyst's own DNA. Detectives, she argued, had forced puzzle pieces together and arrested an innocent man. And near the end of the trial came testimony the jury may not have known how to weigh. Miller had told his wife, and at least one friend, that he believed the DNA evidence against him was too strong, that it would convict him. On Friday, November 6th, the jury of 7 women and 5 men got the case. They deliberated through the afternoon and went home for the weekend. So did Terrence Miller. You already know what Monday morning brought. The 911 call from the house off 52nd Place West. The motion to dismiss. The prosecutor, who refused to let the answer die with the defendant. Judge David Kurtz, ruling that the verdict would be heard. The jurors returned to the courtroom that afternoon, knowing none of it. They had reached their decision that morning. In the same hours, Miller's wife was dialing for help. The verdict was read aloud: guilty, murder in the first degree. Jody's family showed no outward reaction as the words landed. When the court recessed, they embraced. The lead cold case detective, Jim Scharf, said he was glad the family got to hear it, that hearing it mattered. An autopsy later confirmed what the county already understood, that Miller had died by suicide, by gunshot, in a home where the court had ordered every firearm surrendered. But the fight over that verdict was not finished, because in American law, a conviction with no sentence is fragile. In some states, under a doctrine called abatement, a defendant's death before sentencing or appeal can wipe a conviction off the books entirely, as if the trial never happened. That was the question now hanging over Snohomish County. Miller's defense asked the court to vacate the conviction, erase it. On December 17, 2020, on what should have been sentencing day, Judge Kurtz held a hearing with no defendant in the room. Jody Loomis Smith spoke first. Both of her parents, she reminded the court, died without ever knowing who killed Jody. She said she did not want vengeance. She wanted the truth written into the record, permanently, with a name attached. Miller's niece, the only member of his family present, offered the Loomis family a tearful expression of sympathy for their loss. Then the judge ruled. Vacating the verdict, he said, was quite simply not the right thing to do. In place of the sentencing that could never occur, he read and signed a document affirming that Miller's guilt had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Labels and symbols matter, the judge said, and how a case ends matters. 48 years, 3 months, and 25 days after Jody Loomis rode away from Winesap Road, her killer's name was fixed in the record of a court of law, where no appeal and no escape could ever reach it. Her sister stood outside that courtroom and said the words this whole story comes down to: truth never dies. They thought it would, she said. They thought the case was too old. It was not. Terrence Miller controlled the last morning of his own life. He chose the one door the court had not locked. But the thing he was running from caught him anyway, hours after his death, in a quiet courtroom in Everett. He cheated the sentence. He did not cheat the verdict. If this story stirred up anything heavy for you, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is free and answers around the clock. And if these cold cases matter to you, subscribing is how you make sure the next one gets told. Because there is one thread from this story still waiting to be pulled. That 7-month-old newspaper on Terrence Miller's table was not about just any case. The front-page arrest he was studying was the 1987 double murder of a young Canadian couple, Tanya Van Keulenborg and Jay Cook, worked by the same Snohomish County detective, Jim Scharf, and it became the first case in history where genetic genealogy carried a defendant all the way to a jury verdict. The case Miller was watching, the one that told him they were coming. That story is next.